Hello and welcome to the world as we see it. Today, the 14th of August. Forgive me for looking a bit scruffy. I've been working all day, and it's a 15-hour day. And yesterday was a long day. Today's a bit of a long day, and yeah. So and in truth, I haven't got any new razors, so. That was it. So I either had to, there was no option. The prospect of shaving with an old razor. I don't know if anyone's done that, but it's awful. So forgive me. Anyway, now who am I? Where are we? What are we doing? My name's Lloyd Hobart Mitchell. I'm an ordinand with the St George's congregation here in Pattaya, in Thailand. And my formation is being overseen by the chaplain of St George's Anglican congregation, and his name is Father David Price. What we do here really is, actually I tend to read quite a lot because I've got to read anyway, and these are books which I'm tasked to read and have an understanding of before I start a ministry course with Sarum College, which starts in October, and that's connected somehow with the University of Durham. Meanwhile, my in context formation will continue here. That's an online course. In the real world, my formation will continue here under the watchful eye of Father David, which I can't tell you how lucky that makes me feel, because he's excellent. So, what are we doing today? First of all, we're starting with an invitation. And it's an invitation to, let me share this, it's an invitation to our service tomorrow. If I take you on our website, we go to the sermons page, and in the sermons page, you can see forthcoming services, and that's tomorrow's service there. We can click on that, and that takes us directly to the order of service for tomorrow. Of course, we will be streaming the service tomorrow, and that starts at 3 o'clock Bangkok time, Jakarta time. I don't know what time that is where you are, but what's marvellous, I think, about our order of service online is that the music for the hymns is pre-recorded by Father David on his organ here in Thailand, and let's have a bit of a taste of that. So, you get the idea. You can scroll down to the bottom of the order of service. There's the music there. There are the hymns there, pre-recorded, and you can join in, okay? Because further up, you can see where it says hymn, and you can click on that, and there are the words, okay? So there's no excuse, I think. I know what we were reading yesterday was all about the fact that online worship is not the same as in-person worship. Nevertheless, we try our hardest to make it so you are part of the service. So please do come along. It's 3 o'clock Bangkok time, whatever time that is with you. We will be sharing the event on Facebook. I think we've already shared the event on Facebook, I'm sure. And so you can find us by looking at our fan page and going, our fan page is at St George's Pattaya on Facebook. You can go to our events, you can click on that to say you want to be alerted when we're coming online, and you can join us online. And that would be great. We would love to have you, we'd love to welcome you and share with you our worship. So that's our invitation, that's my invitation, which we're extending to everyone to come along. And also, even though you're at home, please do join in. Okay, that's essential. Now, the next thing we're going to do is have a look at Pritchard, John Pritchard's book, which is the life and work of a priest. And we're reading that, we're slowly covering bits and pieces from that. And I think we're up to the bit that says, worship relates to those who don't come to church regularly. Okay? So worship relates to those. We're in it's a bit confusing because I was in chapter 1, and then there's another page. So there's chapter 1 which says, what kind of love is this? And then there's another section which says part 1. So it's chapter 1, part 1, the glory of God, and we're on page 17. So it says, worship relates primarily to God, second, to God's gathered people, and third, to God's other people. Those who don't come to church regularly, but might. In one sense, we are already worshipping on their behalf. Not everyone will be in church, but everyone can be represented. Those who worship regularly can be encouraged to see themselves as performing a service of profound value to the community by coming before God with praise and prayer on behalf of those whose imaginations have not yet been caught by the beauty of God. Nevertheless, we can go further and recognise that in the course of a year, a very large proportion of the population comes to church for one reason or another. In a recent poll, 86% of British people said that they had been in a church in the past year. Moreover, over 40% of people say they go to church for some event over the Christmas period. People come for baptisms, a huge turnout in most parts of the country now that baptisms have taken over the social significance of weddings, for funerals, memorial services, carol services, school services, community thanksgivings, and more. Here is a golden, or at least a silver, opportunity to present the positive, attractive face of the church. The priest has an opportunity to deal well with people's experiences of transition and to show not only that the teaching of Christ offers profound wisdom on the vagaries of the human condition, but also that worship can be a powerful vehicle for a community's emotions and celebrations. But here we have to be honest. The church often succeeds wonderfully with such occasions, but on other occasions it's dire. Worship can both convert and repel. The conduct of worship can be incompetent, the music terrible, the Bible readings tired out, the sermon vacuous, and the whole experience empty. If everybody is on autopilot, the occasional visitor to church may have his or her prejudices reinforced to the point of total resistance. Richard Harris, the former Bishop of Oxford, wrote of a young man coming to church for the first time for many years. He was, in many ways, typical of his time, quite well off, relaxed, thoughtful, honest. He said he went to church with a sense of interest and expectancy, but came away deeply disappointed. He felt diminished rather than enlarged, smaller and nastier rather than encouraged in a love of life and of other people. He probably never returned. We need to offer worship that may suddenly resonate with the occasional attender and set up echoes of a far forgotten land that needs investigating. It may mean subtle changes to regular services to meet the changing needs of our culture's secular children. In either case, the need is to enrich worship, to appeal to the senses, to use story and symbol and space and silence. One danger for us lies in making the assumption that there is a normative golden age of liturgy, 1662, or church music, 19th century, or preaching, Billy Graham. God's Spirit is constantly creative, and we need the best of every age. Bring on the contemporary poets of the Word and artists of the Spirit. Fresh expressions of church will draw out of its leaders, ordained and lay, an even wider range of liturgical experiment. And after-school kids club needs another repertoire of worship resources and ideas that would leave the aficionado of 8 a.m. BCP communion amazed and hopefully delighted. Worship at a youth congregation or a small alternative worship community may use traditional ingredients such as visual stimuli, scripture, music and ritual, but in forms hardly recognizable to a traditional churchgoer. Cafe churches, network churches, and churches based on community projects may hardly use worship as usually understood at all, because they are more committed to exploration, experiment, and personal experience as they build appropriate local communities. Priests working in these spheres need committed prayer and much encouragement. In worship, that looks to the needs of occasional attendees. Therefore, the need is to use other languages of worship, other times for services, and other styles of exploration. In particular, it will involve learning to handle informality with dignity. Now that's a priestly art. We need to be able to make worship natural before it can become supernatural, or it might end up being simply unnatural. The priest is the prime agent responsible through the Holy Spirit for whatever the wow factor is ever experienced in worship. It won't happen every time, of course, but sometimes the priest might hope to hear people coming out of church saying, "Wow, that was special," or "I'd come more often if services were like that," or "I wonder what it is they've got." Anything rather than the Christmas greeting, "See you next year then, Vicar." Brilliant. So there we are. It's about horses for courses. And one of the things that I believe St. George's does very well here in Pattaya in Thailand is it is standing by the principles of high church liturgy. In the landscape in Pattaya here, there's a lot catering for those worshippers who want disco lights or electric guitars or even bands with backing singers. really, in terms of the Anglican world, we are the only option in Pattaya in Thailand. If what the person wants is a traditional way of worship, with organ music, with hymns, with weekly communion within the Eucharist. So I think we can stand tall knowing that what we are providing is, even though to some in a place like England it would look very traditional, here in Thailand it's quite niche, it's quite extraordinary. Now, thank you, John Pritchard. That was very, very useful. Food for thought, all of it. Now, we're going to go on and read a little bit more about from Dan Kimball's How Not to Read the Bible. And it's only fair to say I've reached out to Dan Kimball to tell him what we're doing, and that, you know, we're going through his book. And I've asked him maybe he might be up for meeting with us online, you know, a Zoom meeting, and giving us a bit of a chat about his book. So if anyone out there has any questions for Dan Kimball, then I'd be very, very pleased to hear them, so that then we would be prepared for any kind of short 10 or 15 minute interview. That would be really exciting. So hopefully Dan Kimball will come back to us and tell us that he would be delighted, of course. Of course, I'm being very optimistic. I don't know if that's true, but we will see. Now, we are starting on page 8 today of How Not to Read the Bible. And we're going to the section which says, yes, there are puzzling and disturbing Bible verses, but there are explanations. So I'm pleased we've got to this, because I was a bit worried. As I was reading it over the last couple of days, I was thinking, there were some bits which were a bit controversial. Maybe there's going to be a lot more, but let's have a look. It says, if you wonder about the validity of what the Bible teaches, I want you to know that I can relate to how you think and feel. My friends were worried that the Bible could possibly corrupt me. What if they were right? Christians all around the world see the Bible as a sacred book, but there are other sacred religious books out there. How do we know the Bible is the one, a revelation from God? Good and sincere people believe things that aren't true all the time. Who is to say the Bible and its teachings make sense for us today? We can't just sweep questions like these under the rug and ignore them. They forced me to look at the origins of the Bible and whether there are ways of understanding the bizarre and unusual things in it. And so, let me carry on. Sorry, I needed to click because I saw there was a message, but it's not one to say there's anything wrong with the stream, so that's good to know. So, in it, where were we? Although you may not know me personally, I can say this very confidently to you. I would not be writing this book if there were no explanations for these Bible verses, if there weren't reasonable responses. I likely would have become an agnostic and not taken the Bible seriously as God's inspired words. When I was exploring the validity of Christianity and the Bible, I had to wrestle with questions like these and study to find the truth. I did not want to follow a cult, a wishful religion, or a mindless faith. I wanted to follow truth. I had no pressure from family or peers pushing me to ignore the difficult things or to believe that the scriptures are true and good if they aren't. I would never, ever mislead anyone into believing in a faith that is not trustworthy. I can say with confidence that we can intelligently and with faith believe that the scriptures are from God. If you knew me, you would know that I am never closed to learning new information, and am always looking at current criticisms of Christianity and the Bible. No Christian should be afraid of or ignore difficult questions. So, I think we'll look at one more section, which gives us 2 more pages, before we move on to the highlight of the evening, which is Paul Tillich's systematic theology. The section we're going on to here is on page 9, and it's called The Key: Learning How Not to Read the Bible. The good news is that there are responses to these bizarre Bible verses and difficult questions. You can be a thinking, intelligent Christian and 100% believe in the trustworthiness and inspiration of the Bible. Yes, these verses certainly do seem difficult to comprehend. However, I've learned that when we apply certain study methods and examine verses in their context, it can change how we view and read the Bible. That's what I'll be addressing in this book. The overwhelming majority of the disturbing Bible verses that we read or see on memes are being read incorrectly. Yes, these verses are actually in the Bible. They are strange and difficult to understand. Absolutely. But we aren't taking into consideration how to read the Bible to understand their meaning. Applying some basic principles for reading any verse in the Bible makes a drastic difference. The key to making sense of crazy and disturbing passages is to understand how not to read the Bible. Here's where we are heading. First, we'll learn what to do when we come across a crazy-sounding Bible passage. We'll start with some critical principles to utilize when we open a Bible or read any verse, and how these can drastically change how we understand a passage in the Bible. These are principles most people who criticize or who are confused about the Bible don't know how to use. Second, we'll look at several of the Bible passages most commonly objected to. We will look at 5 areas of challenge to the Bible and ways to address them. There are more than just 5, but these are the most commonly discussed topics. Let's have a look. The anti-science Bible. We'll focus on the creation story in the early chapters of Genesis, which is one of the most commonly mocked sections of the Bible. Does the Bible teach that the earth is only 10,000 years old? Is the only option believing that God created everything in the universe in 6 24-hour days? Does the Bible teach that evolution is false, and that we have to either reject the theory of evolution or reject the Bible? Does the Bible really teach that there was a talking snake? 2. The pro-violence Bible. How do we worship and love a God who kills thousands and thousands of people, even children, in the passages of the Bible? If God is loving, how can the Bible, with its stories of violence, really be true? Is the Old Testament God a different God than Jesus? The anti-women Bible. In both the Old Testament and New Testament of the Bible, there are verses that clearly tell women to submit to men and to be silent and not to speak or teach. We see stories of men having multiple wives and even exchanging women as property. Isn't the Bible just promoting misogyny and male chauvinism? 4. The pro-slavery, anti-shrimp and bizarre commands Bible. There are passages in the Bible about shrimp, slavery and bloody big toes. There are many Bible verses that seem to suggest that the evil of slavery is okay. There are many bizarre verses about commands not to wear clothing with 2 types of fabric, about not eating shrimp, and about rituals that include dabbing blood on big toes and thumbs as part of worship. Don't these suggest the Bible is a primitive book and not to be taken seriously today? Number 5. The intolerant, only one way to God Bible. The Bible claims there is only one way to God. The world has more than 7 billion people, and there are more than 4,000 religions, including 5 major ones. Yet we see verses in the Bible claiming that God is the only truth, implying that all other religions and sacred texts are wrong. Isn't this arrogant, oppressive, and irrelevant? While there are plenty more very strange and confusing subjects and verses in the Bible that we could cover, we can look at these 5 to start. There are some of the more frequently pointed out ones. We will walk through not just responses to these topics, but more important, how we get to those responses. The way, whenever other difficult questions and crazy verses are brought to your attention, and they will be, you'll have some basic methods for addressing them. So that's taken us to nearly the bottom of page 11. The next section which we will cover is study helps for churches and groups. And I really think this book is going to be a corker. Okay, I'm really looking forward to it. And yes, I think it's going to be very good. I've just read a lovely comment by Elizabeth, and she's watching on Facebook. I can also see Alpha and Lindy, one of my old colleagues from a homeless charity I used to work with in Canterbury, is watching as well. But Elizabeth has said she really enjoys the talk tonight, especially about going to church and to go online to worship God. And let me just click there so I can see the rest. And it's difficult for some people to attend a service, and what a blessing it is. So yes, good night, Elizabeth. I'm pretty sure you're probably going off to Bedfordshire because you're in Australia. But very nice to hear from you too. Now, we are, having looked at John Pritchard and Dan Kimball's books, we are now coming to the highlight. He says with a wry smile, picking up the hefty volume of Paul Tillich's Systematic Theology. We've got 427 pages to read. That was given to us as a task by Father Tom, who is the former chaplain of St George's congregation here in Pattaya in Thailand. And we read, for those of you who don't know, we read a page or 2 every evening. We're trying to slowly chunk our way through this. It's a pretty hard book, okay? The language can at times seem impenetrable, but actually, as we've gone through this book, we're probably, what are we? We're probably about, well, we're that far through. So we're probably about 8% through the book, maybe a bit more. And the more we're reading it, the more I'm getting to understand what Tillich is saying. At the beginning, reading the introduction, I'm not going to lie, I had absolutely no idea what he was saying. I would read a page 2 or 3 times. Progress was painfully slow. But actually, since sharing it on here, on Twitch or Facebook or YouTube, wherever you're watching it, by reading it with folk, knowing that even if you're not seeing me right now live, even if you're happening to watch this, in the replay, it's actually quite heartening. It's a real blessing. So let's crack on. We're on page 165. We're in the chapter which is called Being and the Question of God, and we're midway down the page. So the third level of ontological concepts expresses the power of being to exist and the difference between essential and existential being. Both in experience and in analysis, being manifests the duality of essential and existential being. There is no ontology which can disregard these two aspects, whether they are hypostasized into two realms, Plato, or confined in the polar relation of potentality and actuality, Aristotle, or contrasted with each other, Schelling, Kierkegaard, and Heidegger, or derived from each other, either existence from essence, Spinoza, Hegel, or essence from existence, Dewey, Sartre. In all these ontologies, the duality of essential and existential being is seen, and the question of their relation to one another and to being itself is asked. The answer is prepared by the polarity of freedom and destiny on the second level of ontological analysis. However, freedom as such is not the basis of existence, but rather freedom in unity with finitude. Finite freedom is the turning point from being to existence. Therefore, it is the analysis of finitude in its polarity with infinity, as well as in its relation to freedom and destiny, to being and non-being, to essence and existence, which is the task of ontology in the third level. The fourth level deals with those concepts which traditionally have been called categories, that is, the basic forms of thought and being. They participate in the nature of finitude and can be called structures of finite being and thinking. To determine their number and organization is one of the infinite tasks of philosophy. From the theological point of view, four main categories must be analyzed: time, space, causality, and substance. Categories like quantity and quality have no direct theological significance and are not especially discussed. Other concepts, which often have been called categories, like movement and rest, or unity and manifoldness, are treated implicitly on the second level of analysis. Movement and rest in connection with dynamics and form, unity and manifoldness in connection with individuality and universality. The polar character of these concepts puts them on the level of the elements of the basic ontological structure and not on the level of the categories. Finally, it must be stated that two of the transcendentalia of scholastic philosophy, the true and the good, verum bonum, usually combined with being the oneness, es unum, do not belong to pure ontology, because they are meaningful only in relation to a judging subject. Their ontological foundation, however, is discussed in connection. Whoops, that frightened me. So, Natter Warren, thank you very much for following. Natter Warren, oh, we've got a few more. We've got a few people following over the past few minutes. So, Porn Suppat is also following. Thank you very much for that, Porn Suppat. We've got a few people following right now, and that's marvellous. And we've got somebody, wow, it's amazing. They're following, people are following. And I don't know where you found us. Well, hopefully you'll be able, sorry, I'm going to come back to this, but I do need to say that hopefully you'll be able to have a look down here, and down here is a follow or a share or a subscribe, depending on where you're watching. And at the top, if you go above the post or in the comment section, there is a link to the Twitch page. And if you come over to Twitch and join us here, good Lord, I don't know how I'm going to make that so it doesn't make any noise. It's very good though, isn't it? It's very good. I think we can do that just so that we can see it but not hear it. But it's wonderful, wonderful that you're all following. I'm really very, very happy about that. That's great. We've had several followers. That's great. It's really wonderful to know that you're here and watching us. That's marvelous. Okay, so we'll carry on. We were down to here. Their ontological foundation, however, is discussed in connection with the duality of essence and existence. Since it is the purpose of this section of the theological system to develop the question of God as the question implied in being, the concept of finitude is the centre of the following analysis. For it is the finitude of being which drives us to the question of God. First, however, it is necessary to say something about the epistemological character of all ontological concepts. Ontological concepts are a priori in the strict sense of the word. They determine the nature of experience. They are present whenever something is experienced. A priori does not mean that ontological concepts are known prior to experience. They should not be attacked as if this were meant. On the contrary, they are products of a critical analysis of experience. Nor does a priori mean that the ontological concepts constitute a static and unchangeable structure, which once discovered will always be valid. The structure of experience may have changed in the past and may change in the future. But while such a possibility cannot be excluded, there is no reason for using it as an argument against the priori character of ontological concepts. Those concepts are a priori which are presupposed in every actual experience, since they constitute the very structure of experience itself. The conditions of experience are a priori. If these conditions change, and with them the structure of experience, another set of conditions must make it possible to have experience. This situation will persist as long as it is meaningful to speak of experience at all. As long as there is experience in any definite sense of the word, there is a structure of experience which can be recognized within the process of experiencing, and which can be elaborated critically. Process philosophy is justified in its attempts to dissolve into processes everything which seems to be static. But it would become absurd if it tried to dissolve the structure of process into a process. These simply would mean that what we know as process has been superseded by something else, the nature of which is unknown at present. In the meantime, every philosophy of process has an explicit or implicit ontology, which is a prioristic in nature. This also is the answer to historical relativism, which denies the possibility of an ontological or theological doctrine of man by arguing as follows: since man's nature changes in the historical process, nothing ontologically definite or theologically relevant can be affirmed with regard to it. And since the doctrine of man, i.e. his freedom, his finitude, his existential predicament, his historical creativity, is the main entrance for ontology, and for the main point of reference for theology, neither ontology nor theology is really possible. Such a criticism would remain unanswerable if the ontological and theological doctrines of man claimed to deal with an unchangeable structure called human nature. Although such a claim often has been attempted, it is not necessary. Human nature changes in history. Process philosophy is right in this, but human nature changes in history. The structure of a being which has history underlies all historical changes. This structure is the subject of an ontological and theological doctrine of man. Historical man is a descendant of beings who had no history, and perhaps there will be beings who are descendants of historical man who have no history. This simply means that neither animals nor supermen are the objects of a doctrine of man. Ontology and theology deal with historical man as he is given in present experience and in historical memory, and an anthropology which transcends these limits empirically towards the past or speculatively toward the future, is not a doctrine of man. It is a doctrine of the biological preparation for, or the biological continuation of, what is a special stage of the universal development was, and is, and perhaps will be, historical man. In this case, as in all others, ontology and theology establish a relatively, but not absolutely, static a priori, overcoming the alternatives of absolutism and relativism that threatens to destroy both of them. Now, this agrees with a powerful tradition in classical ontology and represents bivoluntarism and nominalism. Even before Duns Scotus, theologians rejected the realistic attempts to fix God to a static structure of being. In Duns Scotus, and all ontology and theology influenced by him, up to Bergson and Heidegger, an element of ultimate indeterminacy is seen in the ground of being. God's potestas absoluta is the perennial threat to any given structure of things. It undercuts any absolute a priorism, but does not remove ontology and the relatively a priori structures with which ontology is concerned. Ooh, that was really hard to read. I mean, I'm going to just say that. I mean, I don't know what it was like to listen to, and I apologise to anyone who says. I mean, it was really hard to read. It's just so impenetrable. So, anyway, we are now on page 168. We're going on to the basic ontological structure of self and world. Next, we'll come back to that on Tuesday. So next time I see you will be Tuesday. That's what I'm looking forward to. We'll come back to Tillich, and of course give credit at every turn to Father Tom. Now, we've had like after like after like after like, and it's absolutely wonderful. And interestingly, lots of Thai names. So that's really wonderful to see some wonderful Thai names, and some of them I recognise. Some of them we've worked with in the past. So that's really wonderful to see. Such a bonus. Now, as we do normally at this time of night, we leap across to the website which gives us the daily common prayer before we close the transmission for the evening. I've shared the link to the daily.commonworship.com website with you, and that's on Twitch, by the way, so if you don't see that, that's on Twitch. What I will do now is say the collect, and the collect this evening is: O God, you declare your almighty power most chiefly in showing mercy and pity. Mercifully grant to us such a measure of your grace, that we, running the way of your commandments, may receive your gracious promises, and be made partakers of your heavenly treasure. Through Jesus Christ, your Son, our Lord, who is alive and reigns with you in the unity of the Holy Spirit, one God, now and forever. Amen. So, thank you very much, all of you who have joined me this evening. Thank you so much for spending your time keeping me company. Thank you so much if you have followed me and followed us today. That's great, and we do look forward to seeing you again next time. It's been a real delight this evening. We've had some, I've read some very interesting stuff with John Pritchard. I feel we've really got into the Dan Kimball book now, so that's really good. I'm feeling very positive about that. Paul Tillich, we're going to have to let percolate for a little while, just to see what happens. So I often think that I can put the book down after reading 2 pages and not feel like I fully comprehend everything that's been said, only for tomorrow morning for me to wake up and think, oh, and there's a penny drop moment. So that's hopefully what's going to happen. Either way, I'm going to say to you, hopefully you will join us tomorrow at 3 p.m. Bangkok time for our regular Eucharist service on Sunday with Father David and me. I'm serving, but Father David is obviously at the altar and in charge. So please do join us in our worship, and we look forward to that. Next time we'll be seeing you here for the to read some more. Will be on Tuesday, so hopefully you come back and join me here too. Okay, well look, I'm going to not waste any more time. I'm going to say good night with prayers